Okay, what fun. Almost set up here. This is wild. And get to the right tab. Okay, good morning, and welcome to the Real Preservation Team Sprint 12 demo. First, for a brief overview, the team is building an inventory and audit service for objects in Stanford's digital repository that will eventually also be able to archive and replicate objects to the cloud. And we've been spending most of our time in the Preservation Catalog repository in the Sewell DLSS GitHub organization. We are using this document, the Steps to Production checklist, to track our progress towards these goals. As you can see, we're finished with the first two milestones. For details on those milestones, you can see our previous demos. And we're well on the way to finishing milestone 3, which represents our ability to check that a MOAB or an STR object is properly versioned between the MOAB and the repository and its representation in our inventory. This is what we call the catalog to MOAB version check, and the guts of it are in the catalog to MOAB class in the Preservation Catalog repository, in case anyone's curious to take a look at it. We finished the code for this check and we deployed it to our staging environment. And we've run the check twice against one of our larger storage routes. We've run it twice because we have so many objects that we want to be able to check objects in batches, and we wanted to play with batch size to test for performance. We made the batch size configurable and ran the check with our chosen default batch setting of 1,000 objects at a time. And we also ran it with a larger batch size of 10,000. And when we ran it with a batch size of 1,000, the elapsed time of the run was 3 hours and 43 minutes. And when we upped the batch size to 10,000, the run took just over 3 hours. So it seems like we get a performance benefit there. In general, the check seems to be working as expected, which means that we'll presently cut a new release. And I'm drafting the release notes here. We will then take this release after we cut it. We will deploy it and run it in our production environment and run the check against our production data. Our fourth milestone is for checksum validation. Checksum validation is a process that will help us protect repository objects against bit rot. Actually, we've already begun writing some of the checksum validation code. Some of it's currently even in the master branch of the catalog. We've done some investigation, and we found that it's likely that a good amount of our requirements are met by existing code in the MOAB versioning gem that we can hopefully reuse in the catalog code. We'll step through some of the pre-existing code in a terminal in a minute. Just to give you some numbers, for the catalog to MOAB milestone, we've closed 17 tickets. We've got 3 left. That's just to cut a release, to deploy to prod, and to run the check in prod. And we've got a few sort of non-high priority tickets in the backlog. And then for our next task, for checksum validation, we've already finished 9 tickets. We've got 3 in progress, and we have 8 of them on deck. Just to look at our commit history over the last week, we've committed 23 times. And just to give you sort of a brief rundown of the types of work done, we've added errors to checksum validation. We've normalized timestamps that the C2M check will call. we've done some refactoring to make the code that reports errors to workflows simpler. We've enhanced some information in our error messages. We've stubbed out rake tasks that we'll call the checksum validation checks. We've made sure that our C2M query SQL query will be able to check all objects in the storage root in batches. And we were able to squash a bug in our rake tasks where the timestamp wasn't normalizing. That was something that was nice to catch in stage before we deployed and ran in prod. Just to take a brief look at the Moab versioning gem, like I said, this has been a helpful gem to us in checksum validation in some of our previous milestones. And what I'll do right now is to sort of briefly walk us through some of the validation code that we found there, and that may be helpful to us. So I will fire up a console. First, I'll load up a Druid and the directory that lives in. And then what we'll do next is to create what's called a storage object. This is something that the Moab versioning gem gives us. Once we have the object, we can load up particular versions of the object. So we'll load up version 3. Once we have a particular version loaded up, let me bump this up here. We can take a look at particular files in the version. For example, we can take a look at the signature catalog. The signature catalog, as you can see, is basically just a mapping between files in the Moab. So for example, here's Eric Smith's dissertation, and here are some of its checksums. Let's see. We can also create an inventory of all files in a Moab. That's also an object that the Moab versioning gem gives us. And finally, we can perform this task called verify manifest inventory, which will basically give us a verification result that tells us that the files in version 3 match against their expected checksums. And you can see here at the bottom of the verification result, the object has truly been verified. And like I said, we're hopeful that this code will help us out in our checksum validation coding down the line. That's basically it for this demo. Stay tuned for future demos as we continue working towards our goals of hooking the catalog service up with our ingest robots, and as we begin developing our archive and replication service. Thanks.